So for me, I think storytelling is photographing my thoughts. For me, it's about just seeing my emotions in the closest they can be to physical form. So when I am telling a story, it's about the predominant emotions, interests, and ideas that are running through my mind at that point of time. Because I've seen that time and time again. Sometimes I start writing something and it flows, the truer it is to what I'm feeling at that time and what is preoccupying my mind at that time and where I am at that time in my life, the easier the flow of that content is. And the when I'm done with it, it requires minimal changes because I just feel it's the truest that it can be to where I am in my life at that point. And similarly, sometimes um, I try to write something, but because it's not authentic to who I am at that point, it's not in line with my belief systems at that time, my interests in that time, my emotions and predominant thoughts at that time, it just doesn't happen. It just feels hollow when it happens. And stories have a way of fighting back. Like any creative work, when they feel that you're forcing them, they will fight back. It's like a horse. I mean, the minute they realize that you are ambivalent, they start bucking and they'll throw you off. So you need to be in perfect sync with what you're creating if it's going to be true. So I'm not saying that you need to um, have lived what you're writing about. I'm not saying that you need to be madly in love to have written an incredible love story. You don't need to have been a serial killer to write a murder mystery, but you need to know what it is you're trying to say through that certain bit of creative work. What is it that you're trying to um, capture that is in the utmost depths of your mind and heart that you want people to see? What is that idea you're trying to convey? And when you can identify that, it's a meditation, because finding what is really at the root of our hearts and minds, it's one of the most difficult things a human being can ever do, because many of the things that we feel are just effects, not the cause. You can be feeling sad, say, and you want to write a very melancholic story. It could work, but again, the sadness is just an effect. What is the cause? What is that sadness rooted in? And when you can explore that root, that's when you're going to get the most powerful content out of it. And that requires you to do a deep dive and understand who you are. And understanding who you are, asking yourself that very difficult question of who am I and what am I thinking right now? Very difficult. You're going to find things that you'd rather not. You're going to have to go through the inconvenience of coming to face facets of yourself that you'd rather not. But it's when you do that, not only do you end up with some of the most powerful creative work, it's also going to give you a little more knowledge about who you are to yourself. And the most difficult thing to be is an authentic person, because when you're authentic, it becomes very lonely, because you're not going to put up with nonsense from other people. You're not going to lie to people please. You're not going to put up with the toxic people just because they're coming anymore. When you're authentic, you kind of you have this armor against all of that. But it's one of the most rewarding and enriching things you can ever hope to do. So it's a win-win situation. You end up with some great content and you become a very, very strong personality. So for me, that's what writing is, I think. I think it's about discovering your authentic self and trying to put it on paper.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Krishna Trilok. Krishna is a professional writer. He has authored the Indian fantasy novel Sharikrida and the official biography of two-time Oscar-winning composer A.R.Rahman. Krishna has also worked as a financial journalist and copywriter. He recently graduated from the Savanna College of Art and Design with an MFA in creative writing. This is a two-part conversation, and you are now listening to part 1. Tune in. Welcome to the show, Krishna. So good to have you here.
Hi, Sangeeta. Thanks for having me. So nice to be here with you.
Yeah, so, I think to just kind of dive right in, what is your earliest memory of writing? Considering you've been doing this officially since you were 13. So what is your earliest memory of writing, and when did you decide to seriously pursue this as a career?
Well, I think I'll answer that question in parts. I think my earliest memory of really writing was when I was in fifth standard, 10 years old, and had I was lucky enough when I was in primary school to have some really fantastic teachers for English, history, uh, arts, and all of those things, and very encouraging, very creative teachers. And my English teacher at the time, when I was in fifth standard, she gave us a writing assignment. It was just, I don't remember the exact topic, but it was just something about what you did on a Saturday morning or something like that. And I wrote this little 1 page short story about a Saturday morning, how I went out and took a walk and just describing the neighborhood and all of that. And my teacher really, really liked it. And that was very encouraging because she said, she liked it so much. She was like, "Do you mind if I keep this?" And that really made me feel good. I think it was my first introduction to when someone likes something that you've created and wanted to keep it as a memory because it affected them in some way. That was the first time I felt the thrill of that. And I think that was my first introduction to the joys of creating something with words and those words giving other people pleasure. And I know that uh, I've said it before, but I've been lucky enough to have been surrounded with many great storytellers. My grandmother, she was a great storyteller. When she would feed me as a kid, when she was feeding me food as a kid, she would tell me stories. I had a lot of domestic help around the house when I was growing up, and many of them, one of the things they did quite brilliantly to get me to cooperate when I was being difficult and I was a difficult kid, was they would bribe me with stories. And the thing is, they would serialize the stories because they would give me like a little bit one day and they'll be like, if you continue to be good, we'll finish the story the next day. So that was my earliest introduction to serialization of stories and suspense and all of those things. So my love for stories, I think, just developed from being surrounded by some very creative people, which is a very big blessing. And of course, I loved movies growing up. I loved books, I loved movies. And as I grew a little older, when I was 13 years old, I just decided that I wanted to be a storyteller. And back then, it's not as easy as it is now with, everyone has a video camera, anyone can make a short film if they want to. But back then, video equipment was tougher to come by. And making a short film was difficult. Making video content was difficult. There was no TikTok and Instagram reels and all of those things. But I decided that I could write something. So I went to a nearby shop, bought a little notebook, and decided that I wanted to start writing a story. And come a long way since then. Never thought that things would pan out the way they have, but that's where it all started. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. And I really think it's the people around you sometimes that also just really influence you, right? And your interests in things.
Absolutely. I think I don't remember where I read it. I mean, everyone's probably heard it before that, you are just the sum total of the 5 people who are closest to you in life. which is what they
Mm.
say, make those five people really count. It's those five people who are closest to you that you really are a sum total of those people. So make sure that they're good people, make sure that they're inspiring people, make sure that um, they're people you can be proud of being a mirror to.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard this as well. And I think technology basically, where you are kind of influenced by the five people closest to you. And I believe those five people can keep changing at different stages in your
They
life.
should.
Yeah.
Ideally, they should. Because if you're going to be the same person throughout the course of your life, I mean, that's great, especially if you are a good person. That's great. But that would be a bit dull, I think. I think it'll be more fun to continuously experiment with being different people. So yeah, ideally those five people should keep changing as because you should keep changing and growing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, evolution is the other name for life, I guess.
Yep.
But yeah, having said that, I know you're also quite a voracious reader. How did you get into the habit of reading? Was it that again something you got into as a child, or was that something you had to develop over time since you were writing?
I think it was something that I developed early on because my mom was a very big reader. I would see her reading all the time. And even before I could really read, I would watch her staring at, these books, pages of books, and I would stare at them too, even though I couldn't understand anything, just because I was like, what's going on over here? She seems so into it. Rather than playing with me, she seems to be more interested in looking into these words. And even before I could read, I would just stare at books, hoping that I would understand something. I never did. Picture books were a little more interesting. But I think it was just something that I saw my mother doing and I wanted to emulate. So that was something that I started doing. And when eventually, of course, when I did learn to read, it was something that actually now I read because I work as a script reader. Now I do a little bit more reading scripts than I do books. I don't read as many books as I used to. But that's the thing, right? Now the world is so different that books aren't the only means of reading. There's so many different means of reading, um, starting from articles online
Mm.
to scripts and screenplays in my case to um, you know articles on different social media platforms, social media posts for that matter, Twitter, all of those things. There's just so much different content that you can read, and you're only limited by what you want or don't want to see, I think.
Yeah, that is true. I agree. I think content is just so easily available in so many forms today, and I think the platforms are just constantly evolving. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really fascinating to see, and of course, there's a huge debate on that as well. But we're not going to get into that, at least not right now. Um, but yeah, I think one of the other things that I know a lot of people kind of debate about is, this whole relationship between reading and writing. And I've had
Mm-hmm.
different people, at least on season one and even earlier on season two, who've come on and kind of given their opinion on this, which is, do you think it's important to be a reader, to be a writer? Can you only be a writer if you're a reader?
Well, the one thing I will say before I go on with this, I will preface everything that I'm about to say with this one statement, which is that everyone is so different. That's the one thing that, I've been doing this and meeting people for over 10 years now who are writers, readers, creative people in general, and each one of them is so incredibly different. I would love to say that there's one thing that they all have in common, but there really isn't, because there are some people who are not readers but are writers. There are some people who are voracious readers but never end up writing anything, or write something which you wonder, was all the reading really necessary for this kind of writing? All kinds of you come across all kinds of people, all kinds of work. I will say this, and I think the only thing that you need to be not just a writer but a creative person, an artist, a designer, a filmmaker, a painter, whatever it may be. I think there's only one thing you need really, and this absolutely personal. Someone else could disagree with me, but this is personally what I feel. I think you need to have experiences that unleash emotion in you. I
Mm-hmm.
think you need to go through things that make you feel something, and those feelings are what you're trying to capture through what you're creating. So I think if reading can unleash emotions in you that cause you to feel so strongly that you go on to create something drawing from those feelings, sure, then reading is absolutely necessary for you to be a writer. But I know a lot of folks who, get those emotions from relationships. For example, I know people who are constantly dating someone, breaking up with them, moving on, or with the same person constantly. I know people who travel. I know
Mm.
people who watch movies. I know people who meditate. I know people who just go on these long walks or work out or go to the gym, whatever it may be, whatever your uh, avenue is. But I think what really, for some people, it's shopping, in fact. And I think it's just about having those experiences. The one thing that I will say is ensure that you find what those experiences are that are going to make you feel alive, that are going to make you think, that are going to, if that experience is going every Saturday night to a bar and just raving until 5 a.m., that makes you think and feel and unleashes something in you that makes you want to say something. Absolutely, absolutely. Don't hurt anybody. Don't do anything stupid. Don't harm yourself. But other than that, seek out experiences, I think.
Yeah.
And all that is to say that, yes, reading can transport you to a lot of worlds. It can make you feel a lot of things, especially when you find the right books that really excite you and can take you to worlds and planets and introduce you to characters that you had never imagined before. Sure, that's going to open up your world and make you think in ways that you hadn't before. But I think reading is just one way that you can create an experience for yourself and make yourself feel things. Um, and especially in a world where, as we've said before, there's so much content and there's so many different ways to have experiences and see things and see different people. I think reading is just one avenue, still a
Mm-hmm.
major avenue, but it's just one avenue, and there's many other avenues you can go to as well. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but if it works for you, then sure, it is necessary for you.
Yeah. No, yeah, I kind of agree to that because I think even with a lot of other writers or creatives I've spoken to, um, like you said, it's a really interesting conversation because each person is different and they have something that specifically works for them.
Hmm.
And I know something I always say is that, hey, anyone can write really, but if you're really that interested in, I guess, looking at craft and different styles, and I think just absorbing more, I think it's great to read books just to kind of even look at different styles people have used and kind of, get inspired by that to create something of your own.
Here's the
Um,
thing that reading can do. Reading, I think, is the one aspect in which reading is absolutely necessary is for your technical craft. To
yeah.
know how to get your technique right, how to get your narrative strengths as best as they can be. Like, for example, if I read a script where it's the formatting is terrible, or the English is bad, or there's grammatical mistakes, the first thing I'm going to tell them is, please read scripts. Please read as many scripts as you can so that you can get an idea of what a good script should be like. But at the same time, that so your technique, yes, through reading can be honed and refined, but your content
Yeah.
can only come through your own, because I think writing, like you said, I think writing truly is something that everyone can do, because you could, maybe you would write it badly even, but someone who is familiar with, the technique of writing can refine that. But
Yeah.
if your content is weak, it doesn't matter how good your technique is, it's not going to help. So getting your content strong, that can only come from inside you. And getting strong content can only come from deep emotions and deep feelings and deep thoughts. It comes from wanting to say something.
Yeah.
So that getting something to say only comes through experiences. And I I had a teacher once who told me this very, very interesting thing. And it's it's not a happy thing to say, but it's true, which is he's he's an amazing guy, very well experienced. He wrote for the Simpsons, won Emmys, all of those things. So very cool guy, and he's traveled all over the world, married, has a wonderful family. And I told him once, you have so much experience to draw from. It must be
Mm.
incredible, all the travel you've done and all of that. You've had so much, you've seen so much. You must have so many stories that you can always tell. And he said, no, I really don't, because I haven't, and this was something that really struck me. And I won't get into everything that we said, but the one thing that he did say was, I really don't have that much because I haven't suffered too much in my life. It's
Hmm.
only from suffering and painful experiences that the best of work comes sometimes. So, um, anyone out there who's listening to this, who's wondering why they had to go through something very painful, I'll say that I'm sorry you had to go through that, but if you want to tell a story from it, trust me, now you have what it takes. So draw from it if you want.
Yeah,
If you do.
I think for sure, in some aspects or cases, I guess trauma or basically pain or something can kind of contribute in creative avenues, for sure. Um, but yeah, I mean, and it's obviously it's terrible when someone has to go through something. When of course
Oh
it's, I
yeah, I
guess,
mean, like people go through terrible things, and I don't
yeah,
mean to make light of it. If
of
someone's
course,
lost a dear family member, which I have, and or lost a friend, and all of those things, I understand that pain, and there's nothing that I can say that's going to say that, oh, listen, it's going to make you stronger, or it's a learning
hmm.
experience, or it's something to draw from. It's painful, it's terrible, and I don't wish it on anybody. But as A.R. Rahman sir once told me when we were working together, he just said he has this one line. It's on his website even, which is that. It's melancholy that brings melody into your life. So um, sometimes it's only from the darkest places that the brightest of um, words and art can come from. So
No,
it's a
for
silver
sure.
lining.
Yeah, for sure. But no, what I was getting to is I think sometimes even just expressing yourself with whatever it is can be very therapeutic, even if you're not doing it for anyone else and you're just doing it yourself.
It can, yeah.
Yeah, because I know for me, writing has been extremely like it started as therapy, honestly. And then I just started doing more of it, in my case at least. Especially when I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's and the like. It was hard on me. So I know like how writing helped me in that sense. But yeah, completely agree. But having said that, what makes a story good for you? And who are some of your favorite writers and even just content creators?
Ah, wow. Well, what makes a story good? That's always an interesting conversation, right? Because it's so different for every person, and I think it really depends on where you are in your life. I think if you had asked me in my late teens or early 20s, I would have said like a racy romance with a lot of steamy scenes makes a great story. But now I'm in a different space in my life, and it depends on where you are, of course, and what you're looking for. But I think for me, really, at this moment, if you were to ask me what makes a good story, is someone with a perspective,
Hmm.
someone with a perspective, uh, um, not just of life or the world or characters, but of just the story, even just how they're looking at what they're doing, their craft and their world. If it's a unique perspective that they're bringing to the table, I consider that a good story, because having a unique perspective is tough, and
Hmm.
it's not just tough, it's also tough to sell, because people we are creatures of habit, and we, as much as we say that we want something different, we also want more of the same. So someone who has the ability and fortitude and um, willpower to have a different vision and see that through to the end and put it out there, it's a testament to their strength, and I always value that. And having, characters that resonate, I think, is the second part, because I think for me, I'm a characters person. I really love
Mm.
good characters, and for me, what makes a good character, a good story is, of course, it's something told differently, something that I have or have not seen, but told differently and interestingly. But for characters, what makes one tick for me um, is it someone I want to be? I mean,
Mm.
all the characters I've ever loved in movies and books are characters who I wish I could be in some way. It could be how they dress, it could be how they behave, it could be their loyalty to family, it could be the way they talk, the way they look at the world. Something about them just makes me like want to be like them. Some of them are villains, some of them are heroes, but all of them have something that make me want to be like them. So it's a combination of good characters and good story for me that makes a good, all in all, good story experience. But to answer the second part of the question of my favorite writers, I think my favorite author right now, authors, I think the top spot would be split between this Japanese author that I love called Keigo Higashino,
Mhm.
who writes in Japanese. I want to actually learn Japanese just to be able to read his work in the original language, but I've read the English translations and I love every one of his books. And the second one, the other part of the top number one spot for me would be Khalid Hosseini,
Mm.
Kite Rana, Thousand Splendid Suns, because I read his books all the time, and every time I cry. Every time I read one of his books, I cry, and I think that's because every time I read it, it hits me either as powerfully as it did the first time, or I see something in it that I did not see initially. And I think um, the greatest books, the greatest stories, I think that's the most amazing thing about them. It's that they grow with you. As you are
Mm.
in different stages in your life, you see different things in them. Suppose, like when I was, when I see you take The Lion King, which is one of my
Mm.
favorite films. When I was a kid, it just was this really cool animated film with, um, lions and great songs and beautiful visuals. But now growing up, you learn it's about just the very basic life philosophy that you start out with big dreams and wide-eyed and all the hope in the world, but then life like really runs you into the ground, and then you lose your way a little while, and then you come back to it, and then you finally become who you're meant to be. You just see it in a different light, and I think that's the most amazing thing, when stories grow with you, and as you are in different stages in your life, you enjoy different things about them. So I think all the stories that have loved throughout my life, movies, books, could be Harry Potter, it could
Yeah.
be, Khaled Hosseini's work, all of these stories. I keep discovering something new about the characters and the narrative every time I revisit them. So that's what makes a good story for me, I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That I think some of the best stories, and I think on season one, I had Sachin Mehrotra, who's a film journalist, who I spoke to, and we had this discussion about how the best stories are the ones that really give you breathing room. They don't tell you how to feel. You can just take whatever you want from it, and obviously, as you grow up, and at whichever stage in life you are, you keep taking something different from the story. I know for me, a story that is like that is Little Women. Absolutely love that book, and just the characters and the way the nuances. It's just amazing.
Absolutely. And to add on to that statement, of giving room, it's exactly like the those everyone laughs about them, like those millions of dollars that are paid for those paintings that are just a white canvas, and you wonder why on earth would anyone pay for just an empty canvas, really. But I remember sitting and actually doing some research on that, and uh, the point is not actually what's on the canvas, it's about what you feel when you look at it. That's what makes the painting work. It's about what it makes you feel, not what it is. It is exactly what it is, but what is it invoking in you? Is it invoking uh, thoughts of existentialism, or is it invoking just anger and irritation? What is it invoking? That's where the art is. The art is not the painting. The art is what it's making you feel. So I think
Yeah.
all stories are like that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the beauty of anything creative, right? It's always open for interpretation. And it's amazing sometimes how people just come and interpret it in ways which even you would have never imagined. And I think
Oh,
that's really,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, that's really one of the best parts of it. But it's
Yeah, my
really
teachers, in fact, always said, if someone reads something into your work and gives it a very intellectual interpretation that you never intended at all, always say, yeah, that's exactly what you wanted, even if it wasn't, because
that's
it's
a that's a good
it's
tip.
yeah,
Good tip
it's
for most creators and writers to take, I think,
it's a
at this
good
point.
bonus. So just say, yeah, that's exactly what I was planning.
The curtains were blue. Oh, he meant sadness. No.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a really interesting conversation I had with another writer earlier this season. Her name's Yashika Doshi. She's an economist and she writes poetry. And one of the conversations we had was that she was talking about how the relationship between writing and the writer is like a two-way street. And she spoke about how it's words and stories that really find the writer as opposed to the writer finding them, which I thought was a very interesting take. So having said that, you've written two books, one being, of course, Sharikrida, and of course, the A.R.Rahman biography. So, I mean, would you say that you have found those stories or those stories have truly found you?
Oh, they absolutely found me, because neither of those was anything like what they ended up being. Uh, Sharikrida was very much a European fantasy story along the lines of, a lot like Lord of the Rings or something like that when I first started out many, many, many years ago. And when Notes of a Dream, A.R. Rahman's biography started out, it was supposed to be he was getting into filmmaking then. He was making his um, uh, film debut with 99 songs, and he was shooting his virtual reality movie La Masque and his concert film One Heart, and he wanted to get into film production and all of that. And it was supposed to be a making of book. It was supposed to be a making of about these movies that he was doing, and just a small project. Then it became his life story, which none of us ever planned on it becoming. So I think these things, it just happens organically. Sure. It's like everything else. You can have the plan, um, but like my spiritual guru always says, be prepared for God to upset your plans so that He can implement His plans for you, because His plans for you are always right. So
Hmm.
you need to be ready for that, and especially when starting out, you think you've got it all figured out. You think that, oh, I have this plan, this is exactly what it's going to be, and if it doesn't happen like this, it's the end of the world, and it has to happen like this because that's the perfect thing, it's going to be great, it's what's going to be the right thing for me. No, none of that happens. Um, it's going to change, it's going to take you on all kinds of detours, it's going to become something completely unrecognizable from what you originally intended. You're going to go sideways, left, right, you're going to take a step back. It's not going to be a straight path, I assure you of that. and and it's interesting that you mention your friend who's an economist, because I think, being a student of economics myself, um, it's by far the most profoundly spiritual subject. I
Hmm.
think it's one of my favorite subjects of study, and there's very few spiritual concepts that cannot be explained by economics. And I always think that along with physicists, economists are some of the most profoundly philosophical people, and some of the most incredible people to talk to, and some of the most creative as well. And it's really like you can call it maybe, I can't think of an economic law that would really suffice right now, except maybe demand and supply. You really, um, it's almost like inherently, even if you're not consciously aware of it, at some very deep spiritual level, you know what you want, and the universe kind of supplies that. The demand is there even if you don't realize it, and the supply automatically calibrates towards it and starts feeding into it. So let it come. Don't stand in its way. Don't let your intellect get in the way and tell the universe, this is not what I want, this is not what should be happening. There are sometimes just bigger things at play, much bigger than you. So let it just happen. Just watch, be an observer, take a third party stance, work, but like the Bhagavad Gita says, don't be too attached to the fruits of the work. Just work and see where it takes you. It'll take you somewhere. It
Yeah.
will take you somewhere, and it'll take you where you need to go. It'll take you to a good place. I assure you of those things. Um, and the game is not over until the last ball is bowled. So keep working and just see where you get, and take stock, and um, just trust the process. Just trust the process and keep going with the flow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree and relate to that about, trusting the process, because yeah, as someone who constantly likes to make plans, I have personally seen how life never goes according to plan.
You need plans.
Yeah.
You need a framework to operate within.
Yeah.
But and it's you need to, and that's part of the fun. You need to have that plan. You need to watch it get it disrupted. You shouldn't be disheartened by that,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't stop you from making a plan again. I mean, when you start the next project, you should again have a plan, even though you
Yeah.
know how it didn't go quite according to plan the last time. You should still have a plan. And then there's those wonderful times when the universe's plan and your plan coincide completely, and things go like clockwork, and you get a little cocky and you think that, oh yeah, this is how it's going to be in the future, and it's not the next time, and it's all part of the fun.
Yeah, for sure. So about plans, you had this TED talk where you were speaking about, drawing parallels between fiction and reality. One of the things I remember you saying in that is, everyone is a prince and they have their own throne. So, of course, drawing from our previous conversation about plans, I wanted to ask you, what is your throne, or what do you think is your throne at this point? And do you think you've managed to kind of, attain it?
I'll answer that in a roundabout way, which is, I remember when I first started out, writing, there was so many visions that I had over 10 years, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. You have all of these grand plans about when you make it, what it's going to look like. And one thing that, it's, I've said it before, but I really can't stress this enough, which is how I would say how uh, the sense of isolation that I had when growing up, in terms of not having very many friends, not being particularly academically gifted, not, being eh, just feeling very unseen by people around me, family, friends, classmates, teachers, relatives, every which way. And I think one of the things that I would look back on my younger self and say, do not do, the one thing that I would change if I had to do it all again, is the feeling of, I'm doing this because I'm going to show them all one day. That it was some sort of an exercise to prove myself to people. There was just a lot of angst and a lot of desperation that was attached to, okay, I have to do this, I have to make a name for myself, become successful, and have all these people, like, see what I'm capable of, get that adulation from people, that respect from people, and all of those things. And when it finally happened, and it came, I mean, like, I can sincerely look back on my younger self and say that all of the people, the things that you wanted to get from them, it's all happened. It's absolutely happened in a way, and in some cases, even greater ways than you could have imagined. But then you realize that, and the one thing that really hit me was, um, well, now you've done all of this for other people. What about yourself? What about what you need to do for yourself? And that's what I think led me on, especially after my second book, that's what led me on a whole new journey about, okay, now I've done all of this for the world. What do I want to do for myself? And I think that's the track that I'm on now, which has led me to this new purpose. The one thing that I do remember, again, my spiritual guru saying was, it could be anybody who has attained great success in whatever they choose to do. It could be a political figure, creative person, activist, whatever the case may be. I think anyone who achieves a great deal of success always worked for a goal that is much larger than themselves. It's not just about being rich, famous, or powerful for yourself, it's something much larger than that. And for me, right now, especially after coming to the United States, for me, my goal has always been, I love, which is why I really wanted to have this talk today on Independence Day, on our 75th Independence Day. For me, what comes first and above everything else is my country. I love my country. I love India. I love its heritage. I love its culture. I love its people. I love everything that is achieved in 75 years against very great adversity. Um, I love that history that we have and that spirit that we have very, very much. And one of the things that really rankles me when I come abroad every time is how little of it is known in the wider world. When I talk about, our epics, for example, or when I talk about facets of our culture, our customs, our heritage, people in the US and in other countries, they're so fascinated by it. They're so awestruck by it in some cases and so intrigued by it, and they're like, why don't we know more about this? And I'm like, yeah, that's my exact same question. I don't understand why more people don't know more about our culture and ways, despite us being the biggest movie producer and having a population of 1.3 billion people. Why are we still not as well represented on the global market as we should be? um, but that is my goal now. My goal now is to create stories, not for myself, not to prove anything to anybody anymore, but um, to make content, to create content, visual, literary, what have you, that is going to capture the spirit of our country, our traditions, our mythology, our heritage, and um showcase that to an international audience, to a global audience. That's what I would like to do, and that is what I'm working on right now. It's of course it's required a huge deal of letting go of everything that was and really changing how I look at the world, my work, everything, how I'm going to go about it, and all of that. But that's what I want to do. That is the goal that I've taken for myself now. And I mean, listen, sometimes how I fully realize how audacious that sounds, and uh, how large the goal is. But I've always believed that unless the size of the goal scares you, it's not, you know, um, enough fun. Looking back now, when I was 13, thinking that, yeah, I wanted to be a best-selling writer, it's like ridiculous. I mean, it's only a 13-year-old's fancifulness that could have allowed for something like that to happen. If I knew then what I knew now, I would have been like, what are you talking about? But um, it happened once, so I think it can happen again, and there's no harm in trying, and I would rather try and fail than not have tried at all. And that's I think I wouldn't use the word thrown because that's a little presumptive, but I would say that it's the new plan, it's the new map, it's the new goal that I've set for myself.
Yeah, and more power to you. From that same TED talk, you also mentioned a line about validation. And it got me thinking, what has your relationship with validation been like, considering now you've written 2 books and even before you were published, right? Just working on your writing and thinking like, oh, will people like this? And validation, I think your relationship with validation also just changes as you grow and evolve. So what has it been like for you?
Well, I think, as vanilla as it may sound, I really think, especially the events of the last 1 year in particular, I think the realization that I think we all know inherently, but it sometimes takes something really significant happening for us to acknowledge it and start doing the internal work. It's that it doesn't, we all start out thinking that when, and we all have these people, we all have these trigger people. It could be, I use trigger people, I don't mean it as a harsh word, but
Yeah.
we all have these key people that we have. It could be our parents, it could be our family, it could be our teachers, it could be a crush, it could be a select group of friends, it could be a romantic partner, it could be anybody. But we all have these few people whom we think that, okay, once we get the approval of these people, we're set. That's all we want. I mean, like, everyone else is a bonus, but it's like posting those Instagram stories for those 5 people to see it. I mean, other than that, it could be anyone else could see it and we don't care, but we want those few people to see it. And we feel validated when that happens. So we all have, I think we all start out saying that, we call it for the world. And yes, of course, the world in general is part of it, but there's really a few people for us who are symbolic of the world, and we start doing this for them. Very often it's the parents or it's close friends we think we want to, like, or school or whatever it may be. But then, well, best case scenario is you achieve everything that you wanted to, and the people that you wanted to prove yourself to take notice, pat you on the back and say well done, and then you're happy, and the story ends there. Now that's the best case scenario, and if that happens for you, I'm very, very, very envious of you, in fact, because what happens more often than not is you do that, and the people that you were hoping to get that validation from, you get it from them, but then you realize you go back to feeling empty, because what's going to happen, and what we all realize eventually, is that it doesn't matter what anybody out there in the world says. Finally, it needs to come from inside. And that's, I think, what you can call it: validation, confidence, any self-love, whatever it does. When we reach that point where it doesn't matter what anybody, even the ones we love the most and the ones whose approval we crave the most, it doesn't matter what any of them say, but we know what we are worth. We know that we are proud of ourselves, and it doesn't matter what what anyone else says. Now that is true validation. And I think, for me personally, I'm on that second stage where I think I've everyone that I wanted to prove anything to, I've done that. I have nothing more to prove to anybody out there anymore. But I have to prove. I need to start believing in in certain things for myself, and that's the more difficult part of the journey. That, as someone who, to be perfectly honest, as someone who suffers from a lot of I wouldn't call it imposter syndrome. I don't think it's that. It's more about it's just the feeling that this could just be a product of upbringing or whatever it is. But I just tend to tell myself that, oh, if I do something and everyone, including people I respect very, very much, tell me, oh, great job, I just think, oh, what's the big deal? Anyone could have done this. So basically, if I can do it, anybody could have done it. So I think, and it's difficult, right? Because sometimes it, and as someone, you don't want to get too cocky, you don't get arrogant or anything like that, but at the same time you need to be realistic. So striking that fine line about saying, yeah, okay, I did a good job. Not a lot of other people could have done what I did. I did it pretty darn good. And not be too proud, not get too arrogant about it, but be realistic. So finding that line of being realistic about my own abilities and achievements while still keeping a level head and not being reliant on anybody else's approval, and just being objective enough to tell myself, you know what, I think I did a good job. And knowing one of the most difficult things to be, especially with regards to your own work and your own achievements and your own output, is to be realistic. Because much like, your pictures or your reflection in the mirror, our minds tend to grossly exaggerate or undermine what we do. It's like, how you look at yourself in the mirror some days and say like, oh, I look terrific, or I look awful. And someone out there just says, no, you look fine, or you look normal. And our minds tend to magnify or undermine our achievements, our appearances, everything a lot. So to come out of that, really the only way to describe it is mental body dysmorphia, and be realistic about what you're doing. It's one of the toughest things, and it's something that I'm working on. It's something that just trying to be as realistic as possible, to say, hey, I did a good job when I did a good job, and say that, oh, I need to buck up when I did a bad job. So I think that's what validation is to me. It's being realistic about your achievements and being gently and affectionately critical of yourself when you do a bad job. There's no point in being like, oh, you're an idiot, you did such a terrible job, and talking to yourself in that kind of way. It doesn't help at all. But be a little kind to yourself and say, hey, I know you're capable of more than this. And once you have that relationship with your own mind, you don't need anybody else. No one can put you down, and nobody can make or break you then. It's all in your own control, and that's a very powerful place to be.
So that was part 1 of my conversation with Krishna Trilok. Don't forget to tune in to part 2, where we talk more about Krishna's life and career, his decision to get back to academia, and more. Talk soon!